This is your daily scripture for March 12th. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. Honored to be with you again today as we continue in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 7. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a tenth part of everything. He is first, by translation of his name, King of Righteousness. And then he is also King of Salem, that is, King of Peace. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. See how great this man was to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though these also are descended from Abraham. But this man, who does not have his descent from them, received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. It is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. In one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. Now, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron? For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest, not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but by the power of an indestructible life. For it is witnessed of him, "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and uselessness, for the law made nothing perfect. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced, through which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath, for those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. But this one was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, "The Lord has sworn, and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. The former priests were many in number, because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently, because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. Lots to unpack today. We're going to take the time to do that because there's a lot to talk about. The writer of Hebrews here is all about the superiority of Melchizedek and his priesthood than to Aaron and his priesthood. He talks about how Aaron had given to Melchizedek a tenth part of the spoils of his victory. That was long before the tithes laid out in the law was given in Numbers 18. So, the writer now compares and contrasts what's going on here, Melchizedek and the Levitical priests. And he makes 5 points here, give or take. He talks about that the Levites received tithes from the people. And that's right, it was called for by the law, it's the right thing to do. Melchizedek received his tithes from Abraham, even though he wasn't a member of the tribe of Levi. The Levites tithed their brother Israelites. Melchizedek wasn't an Israelite as we understand it. Right? He was a stranger. And it was from no ordinary Israelite that he received tithes. Right? He got them from Abraham, who is what? The founder of the nation. Right? It's because of the law that the Levites have the right to exact tithes. Melchizedek, there was no law in existence then. He got his tithes because of who he was. The Levites receive tithes of men who are going to die eventually. Melchizedek lives on forever. We'll get to that. And then finally he says that even though he says Levi's a direct descendant of Abraham and the only man legally entitled to receive tithes. Now, if he was a direct descendant of Abraham, it means that he was already in Abraham's body. Therefore, when Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, Levi was also paid them. Because Abraham, in his body, the final proof is that Melchizedek was superior to him because of Abraham offering him tithes. Does that make sense? Right? Because Abraham is the father of the Levitical tribe, the argument here is the tribe of Levi being in his genetic, is that the best way to put it? His genetic makeup. So in that sense, the tribe of Levi comes under Melchizedek. Interesting, right? But it makes sense if you can get your head around it. So he talks then about fellowship, and he says the old Jewish religion was designed to produce fellowship in two ways: obedience to the law. Right? If a man obeyed the law, he was the friend of God. Second, it was recognized that perfect obedience was out of the question, so that's when the sacrificial system came in. Once God showed us who he was, what was expected, the realization of what we are came, and there had to be something put in place until Jesus came that foreshadowed what was coming. We had to have the idea of, dying for sin, right? And reconciliation to God. We had to get that idea in our heads before Jesus came, or it wouldn't have made sense. So people became a people of the law based on Levitical priesthood, and without the Levitical sacrifices to atone for sin, the law would have been impossible. Makes sense? Makes perfect sense. But the Levitical sacrifices have proven effective to restore this relationship between God and man, because the sacrifices of animals did not solve the problem, did not take care of the issue of sin once and for all. So, what did we need? We need a priesthood in the order of Melchizedek, the priesthood that doesn't end, never ends. He says that priesthood differed from the old in that it was not dependent on the fleshly things of the world. It's a power of life that's indestructible. That's what it's based on. So what is he talking about, right? What's he saying? What he's saying is that every single law that governed the old priesthood had to do with worldly priests and their bodies. To be a priest, right, it had to do with their makeup. You had to be a descendant of Aaron. And even then, there are 142 physical blemishes that might disqualify him. Right? Some of them are detailed in Leviticus 21. Right? But he had to be bathed in water so that he would be ceremonial clean. He had to be clothed in the priestly garments. He had to be anointed with oil, and he was touched on the tip of the right ear, his right thumb, and his his big toe on his right foot with the blood of certain sacrifices which had been made. So every single thing in this ceremony affects if the priest is considered clean and righteous enough to carry out his duties. And so once he was ordained, he had to observe so many washings with water, so many anointings with oil. He had to cut his hair a certain way. Beginning to the end, the Jewish priesthood is dependent on physical things. You know what it wasn't dependent upon? Wasn't dependent upon his character, wasn't dependent upon his ability, and it wasn't dependent upon his personality. If you doubt that, go back and look at the character of Caiaphas and Annas when they crucified Christ, handed him over to over to the Romans to be crucified. What does that say about their character? So it had to do with all this outwardly stuff, had nothing to do with the inward. But the new priesthood through Christ is dependent upon him. A man that now sits, Son of Man, that sits at the right hand of the Father. His priesthood didn't depend on the physical things. It depended upon who and what he was. So the revelation here is that it's not about all these ceremonies and things and observances. It's not about that. It's about Jesus, who was obedient even unto death. And he's outside the law, in the sense of all the priests had to come from the tribe of Levi. They had to be descendants of Aaron. What tribe did Jesus belong to? Judah. And the very fact that God calls him a priest in the order of Melchizedek really turns all of that stuff on its head, doesn't it? But it's because Jesus can do what the old priesthood could never do. And that was give us access to God. That was why there was this curtain between the Holy of Holies and the rest of the temple. And only the high priest chosen at the time could go in there. It's not like that anymore. The things that keep us from God are fear, sin, right? Fear because we don't know God, or we don't accept his gift of grace and forgiveness and mercy. We don't know him because we don't know Christ. But when we come to know God through Jesus, we look at Jesus in the New Testament, we see God in him, perfect representation. We know that God is not this cranky old curmudgeon. He's a loving Father. So the fear goes away. And Jesus on the cross, perfect sacrifice, takes care of sin once and for all. Sin's conquered. The curtain is torn and the way to God is open. And so the writer of Hebrews sets this whole priesthood thing straight. Yeah, it was needed before Jesus came, but it was needed because it showed us that we are who we are, and that we needed a high priest and a sacrifice that would take care of our sin once and for all. And that's what all that stuff in the Old Testament, it all points to Jesus. And so the priesthood is his. Doesn't matter, the tribe didn't matter. What mattered is that he was sent by God and ordained by God. That trumps it all. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and Lord willing, we will chat tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.